Welcome back. So we're just going to touch on something I think is rather complex compared to what we're trying to achieve, and that is we want to do validation. I want to actually make it so that when I add a new user here, notice here now it's grayed out. I can't click the button until I actually add a valid username and a valid email address. Now if I put something invalid here, I'll get email is invalid. As I start typing, it'll actually explain to me now it's valid, and I can save the form if I want to. But as soon as anything is missing, I'll get errors back that you would need to require to fill out the forms, and you can't click the save button. Okay, how do we do this? That sounds easy in my mind, but it's not, because we have to work with something called template reference variables. Yeah, I've had the same feeling. So a template reference variable, as I understand it, is often a reference to a DOM element. So we're trying to go into the DOM, and if you don't know what the DOM is yet, go and read up on that. That's pretty important. We're trying to dive into the behind the scenes. Let's think of it as the structure behind the scenes. Everything is built as a DOM, a huge tree of objects, and we're trying to reference some of these objects behind the scenes. And the example here is that we have a phone in an input field here. Now we want to reference that later, and then we can say phone value. Now this is actually a pretty specific DOM request right here, saying .value on a phone. That's not something we would write in a normal Angular code. Now they're showing another set here where they're actually going in and adding an ng model for a hero name. And then what we can do is actually we can go and reference that ng model directly, and that's what we're going to do in a second. Another thing they're showing here is that actually they're going to make a variable here, a reference variable for the ng form itself, the entire form, and then they can ask for that variable here if that form is actually valid, and if that is not the case, then they disable the button and they hide. If it's not valid, they will show a message here for us. So we're going to now make such a variable to actually show hide errors if we want to. Yes, exciting stuff. So let's have a look at the code, and again I'm just going to show you the only thing I changed things right now is the user creates component HTML file. So I'm going to just do a git and just to compare again with the latest revision, just to give you guys an idea. Now the first thing I did is pretty much I added so that I know now my ng form gets a local reference inside the form. So think of this as kind of a local reference for the ng form. So the ng directive, meaning the Angular code, is now available, so I can start listening for validations and errors inside the form now using this user form dot something. That was the first thing I had to do to actually make this form, to make it so that I can listen for information inside the HTML regarding the form. I hope that makes sense. If not, go and read those validation page that I just showed you. Now inside the input field, I'm going to add this required field. That's another directive explaining that you have to give a username. You have to supply a username. It's required, right? That's easy. The next thing I do is actually I add a link to this ng model, the username model right here. Okay, so I can start using that directly inside the HTML. That means that I'm pretty much just linking to this guy right here by writing only username now. That's how simple it is. But it's very, very complex to get the understanding. The next thing I'm doing is I'm saying I'm going to show a hint. That's just a material component we have available that will show a small hint that you just saw in the HTML here. So it's just showing this email required here. That's the MD hint. And we're saying that should be visible if the username is not pristine, meaning if it's not untouched, if I changed it at some point. And there's an error, and the error specifically shows required, meaning that it's not, this error is going to pop up right here. If that's the case, make it red. We're going to change you can change the way you style this if you want to. Just make the color red in this case, align it in the front, and then write username is required. That's all you have to do. Now you have validation on the input field. Now let me show you a more complex one. The email one has the same idea, exactly the same idea. We have an email for the ng model. We have required, just like the username, but we also added a pattern here. Now the pattern, that is rather complex. It's actually just an email pattern that we have to uphold to call this an email. So we can do exactly the same down here. We'll make a new MD hint for the default errors, and then we'll make a new MD hint for just validating that this is actually a real email, or else it is an invalid email. So what we do is pretty much just say If it's not pristine, meaning if somebody wrote something in the field now and there's an error because we didn't write what we should, and the error is actually a pattern issue, meaning that this pattern is not upheld, it's not an email, then write email invalid. So that was what we had to do to actually make it pop up with this valid, not valid fields below the email. So notice, as soon as I make part of an email, it says, now it's the email is not there, so the required part is gone, but it's not a valid email. So I have to add, and now it's a valid email. Okay, but I still can't press the save because the username is also required, and then I can press the save. Okay, so let's go back and check out why the save button is not enabled. And that's luckily pretty simple. We're just saying disable the button. This is a pretty cool directive as well. Disable the button or function that we can pass in, property we can pass in, sorry, if we not user form is valid. If the user form is not valid, right? So user form here, that references this guy, right? That's the user form. Dot, then we say dot form to get the actual form, and then we just ask it if it is valid. That's all we had to do. Now we're done. Look at the code, try and understand it, maybe go to this page, try and read about it if you want to. There's a lot more information here than I just covered. So go and read about it if you want to. The reference variable template syntax is where it's hidden. And see you in the next lesson where we'll try and work some more with Angular 2.